They say some things break for a reason, and sometimes what gets fixed isn't what you expected. You won't believe what happened when my neighbor came over just to tighten a pipe, and ended up touching a part of me I thought was long forgotten. Tell me, from which city are you watching this? Let's see how far this story travels before the last drop. Now, let me take you back to the day everything started to shift. I was standing in my kitchen watching the faucet drip, one soft splash after another, echoing into the stainless steel sink. It was a quiet morning, the kind where everything feels still but heavy. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon dish soap. I had just scrubbed the counters not because they needed it, but because my hands needed something to do. At 72 you'd think life slows down, but sometimes it just gets louder in the quiet. That faucet had been leaking for a while, and honestly I didn't mind it. But my daughter, Chloe, had come over the day before and fussed over it like I was helpless. "You've got a neighbor right across the street who practically lives with a wrench in his hand," she said, giving me one of those looks daughters say for mothers who they think are too proud. "Ask him." I hadn't spoken to Thomas in months, not out of avoidance, just the usual rhythm of two people living their own quiet lives on the same street. He was 64, still strong, still working part-time at a local hardware store, even after retiring from plumbing full-time. A widower like me, tall with salt and pepper hair, and that slow, warm kind of voice that made you forget time if you weren't careful. So I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Sure, Hannah," he said. "I'll swing by tomorrow morning. Nothing fancy, but I'll take a look." The next morning, I heard the gravel crunch under his boots before I even saw him. He had a canvas tool bag in one hand and a half-smile playing on his lips when I opened the door. He wore a dark blue work shirt rolled up to the elbows and jeans that had clearly lived a life of labor. "Morning," he said. "Still leaking." "Still dripping," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Coffee? Only if it's black and you've got time." That's the kind of thing Thomas always said. Like life didn't need to be hurried through, just lived. He got to work under the sink, muttering now and then, his body stretched out across the tile floor, legs slightly bent, one boot tapping against the cabinet door in rhythm. I leaned on the counter, sipping my own coffee, watching him in silence. He talked as he worked. Nothing deep, just about the heat wave last week. The strange mail he got, how the grocery store switched coffee brands. But in between, I heard something else. The quiet notes of someone who wasn't just fixing a faucet. Someone who, like me, had spent far too many evenings in empty rooms with only echoes and old photographs. "Ever notice?" he said, not looking up. "How something always breaks the minute you start to feel like everything's finally calm?" I smiled. "That's life's way of keeping us from getting too comfortable." He chuckled. "Or maybe it's just making sure we don't forget we're still alive." There was a pause after that. Not awkward, just full. Full of things we didn't need to say out loud. Eventually, he sat up and wiped his hands on a towel. "It's done." Wasn't much. Just a worn washer. I walked over and turned the faucet. No drip. Just smooth flowing water. "Thank you," I said, a little softer than I meant to. Thomas didn't leave right away. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking around like he was remembering something. Maybe his own kitchen. Maybe a moment from years ago. Or maybe he was just lingering, unsure if he should go. "I missed the noise," I said suddenly. I don't even know why. The clatter of people coming in and out, the mess, the laughter, even the arguments. He looked at me for a long second. Me too. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even flirtatious. But it was intimate in that way two people become when they realize they've been living side by side with invisible weights on their backs, never quite acknowledging them. "Would you like to stay for lunch?" I asked, my voice careful. Thomas smiled, not surprised. "Only if you let me bring dessert." We sat down at the little round table by the window, sharing sandwiches and slices of peach pie he picked up from the bakery down the road. We talked about music, about the past, about the small things that make days feel worth waking up for. He reached out once just to pass me a napkin, but his fingers brushed mine, and neither of us pulled away too fast. Something about that moment stayed with me all afternoon. It wasn't dramatic. No sweeping music, no breathless declarations, just two hands brushing in the middle of a kitchen that had finally gone quiet in the best kind of way. When he left, he stood at the door for a second too long. He didn't hug me, didn't kiss me, just touched my elbow gently. "I could come by next week," he said. That porch light of yours looks like it's flickering. I nodded. I'll make sure it does. And then he left. I leaned against the door frame and looked down at the floor where his boots had stood. It was strange how something as ordinary as a leaky sink had brought warmth back into a space I'd thought had gone cold for good. Maybe things don't just break by accident. Maybe sometimes they're a gentle nudge towards something else waiting to be repaired. Something inside. That night after Thomas left, I stood in my kitchen longer than I needed to. The faucet, now silent, seemed almost too quiet. I kept turning it on and off, not because I thought it would leak again, but because I missed the sound. Funny how quickly you can go from tolerating a nuisance to missing it once it's gone. I guess that's what happens when the silence brings memories with it. I didn't sleep much. My bed felt too big again, and for the first time in a long while I wasn't okay with it. I lay there thinking about Thomas. The way he moved, the way he looked at me without ever making me feel small or old or invisible. That gentle brush of his fingers against mine had sent a ripple through me I wasn't prepared for. Not after all these years. The morning came with soft light pouring through the curtains. I wrapped my robe around me and walked to the kitchen barefoot, still caught in the fog of thoughts. I made coffee and sat at the table where we'd had lunch the day before. 2 coffee cups sat in the sink. I hadn't washed them. I don't know what made me do it, but I picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Hey," I said when he answered, suddenly unsure what I was even calling for. "Well, good morning to you too," Thomas said, his voice warm and teasing. "Faucet still holding up?" "Yes," I said, then paused. "I was just wondering if maybe you were serious about that porch light." There was a pause and I could hear him smile through the line. "You know how it was. Want me to come by this evening? Only if you're not busy." "I'm not. I'll bring those muffins you like. The cranberry orange ones. You remember that?" "I remember a lot more than you think." When he came over that evening, he wasn't carrying his tool bag, just a small brown paper bag with the muffins and a 6-pack of those little glass bottled cream sodas, the kind my husband used to love. Thomas hadn't known that, but somehow it didn't feel like a coincidence. We stood on the porch as the sun dipped low, watching as the last of the golden light filtered through the neighborhood trees. The light fixture wasn't broken. Not really. Maybe it had flickered once. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe I just needed a reason for him to come back. He didn't even pretend to work on it for long. "Looks fine to me," he said. Then sat down in the wicker chair beside mine. We sat there in easy silence, sipping sodas and eating muffins, watching the sky turn pink, then lavender, then a soft shade of dusk. His leg brushed mine once, and neither of us moved away. "You know," I said softly, "it's been a long time since someone just sat with me." Thomas looked over, his face half lit by the porch light. "It's been a long time since I've let myself sit with someone." I turned to look at him then. Really look. There were lines on his face. Not harsh, just lived in. His eyes, that gentle gray blue, held a softness I hadn't seen in a man for years. "Not since my Marcus passed. My husband," I started, unsure of where the words were going. "He used to sit out here with me just like this, but we never really talked. We just listened to the crickets and held hands." Thomas reached over and took my hand, not forcefully, not even deliberately. It was more like a quiet offer. I let him, and it was comforting, natural, like 2 puzzle pieces that had waited decades to find each other. We didn't talk much after that. The evening drifted by in the hush of companionship, and when it grew late, Thomas stood, still holding my hand loosely. "I should head home," he said. "You could stay a little longer." He didn't answer at first, just looked at me. His thumb moved slowly across the back of my hand, and I felt that same ripple from the day before. "I'd like that," he said. We went inside, and for the first time in years I didn't feel the need to fill the air with chatter. Thomas followed me to the living room. I lit a candle on the coffee table. Silly maybe, but the light made the space feel warmer, softer. He sat on the couch and I sat beside him, closer this time. "I don't know what this is," I said barely above a whisper. "Neither do I," he replied, leaning in just slightly. "But it doesn't feel wrong." "No," I said, my voice catching. "Doesn't." He didn't kiss me. Not yet. But he did pull me gently into an embrace, and I rested my head on his chest, listening to the slow rhythm of his heart. It was steady, solid, safe. I didn't cry, but I could have. Not because I was sad, but because something inside me was waking up, something I thought had been buried with the last chapter of my old life. Thomas stayed that night, not in my bed, just on the couch. I gave him an extra quilt, and he joked that it smelled like lavender and old books. I told him it smelled like comfort. Before we said goodnight, I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Thank you for fixing more than just the sink," I said. His eyes met mine. "Thank you for letting me." I went to bed with a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the kind of warmth you only feel when you know someone sees you. Not the version you put on for the world, but the real aching, hopeful, flawed, beautiful you. I fell asleep to the sound of a soft snore from the living room, and I smiled into my pillow. Maybe something really had been repaired. Not with a wrench or a washer, but with a touch, a glance, a choice, a beginning. The next morning, the sunlight crept into the room, warm and gentle. I stretched in bed, blinking at the pale ceiling, and for a moment I forgot I wasn't alone in the house. It was only when I heard a soft clinking sound from the kitchen that I remembered. "Thomas." I sat up slowly, adjusting my robe around my shoulders and brushing my fingers through my hair. There was something strangely youthful about waking up knowing someone else was in the house, something tender. My house had been still for so long. I'd forgotten how nice it was to hear someone moving around, just existing nearby. When I walked into the kitchen, I found him standing at the counter with 2 mugs of coffee already waiting. He was barefoot, his sleeves rolled up again, and his hair a little messier than usual. He looked comfortable. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Didn't want to wake you. Hope you like your eggs scrambled." I blinked at him, then at the eggs sizzling gently in the pan. My heart gave the smallest flutter. It was such a simple scene, a man making breakfast, but something about it felt like it had been plucked from a dream I didn't even know I'd been having. "You didn't have to do that," I said, stepping closer. He turned then, smiling that slow, boyish smile of his. "I wanted to." We sat down at the table and ate quietly. There were a few moments when our knees touched, just barely, but neither of us moved them away. After we finished, he took my plate and washed the dishes before I could argue. When he turned off the faucet, he leaned against the counter and looked at me. "I like it here, Hannah," he said softly. "I like having you here," I replied. It was the truth. That afternoon we sat on the porch again. I had changed into a soft summer dress, light blue with tiny buttons down the front. It was one I hadn't worn in a while. Not because I didn't like it, but because I hadn't had a reason to. Thomas noticed. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and it didn't feel forced or awkward. It felt honest. I looked away, my cheeks warming. "It's just a dress." "No," he said. "It's you in the dress." That made me smile. Later we walked down the street together, just to the mailbox and back. But it felt like more. We passed neighbors who waved and smiled, and I realized suddenly what they might be thinking, but I didn't care. For once I didn't care how it looked. Back at the house we sat close on the porch steps. I could feel the tension between us building, not in a dangerous or overwhelming way, but something gentle and aching. Like a soft pull you stop resisting. "Do you ever feel?" I asked quietly, like there's still a part of you waiting to be lived. Thomas turned to look at me. "Every day." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had built in my throat. "I didn't expect this, Thomas. I didn't expect you. I thought that part of life was over." "I thought the same," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. "Until I saw you in that kitchen, fighting with a faucet." We both laughed, but his hand stayed there, warm against my skin. I leaned into it without thinking. His touch shifted then, slow and reverent, his fingers moving along my jawline before his lips found mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It was something else entirely. Something that tasted like patience and loneliness and hope, all stirred into one. I melted into it, my hands finding his shirt, fingers curling into the fabric. We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't need to. Our eyes and everything. When the kiss broke, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've missed this," he whispered. "So have I," I answered. That evening we didn't make any big decisions. We didn't define what we were or where we were going, but we shared dinner again, this time together, cooking side by side. I chopped the onions while he stirred the sauce, bumping into each other on purpose and laughing like we were years younger than we were. After dinner we moved to the couch. I curled up next to him, his arm around my shoulders, and we watched one of those old black and white movies of us could remember the name of. And when I looked over at him, watching his profile in the soft flicker of the television light, I saw something in him that mirrored what I felt inside. It wasn't about rekindling youth. It wasn't about desperation or filling some void. It was about recognition, about two souls who had carried their scars, their stories, their solitude, and found an unexpected answer in each other. When it came time for him to leave that night, he didn't ask to stay. And I didn't ask him to. Instead, he held my hands and said, "Can I see you tomorrow?" And I said, "Yes, you can." Because I wasn't ready for it to end. Because for the first time in years I had started to believe in new beginnings. The next day arrived with an ease I hadn't felt in a long time. I woke up early, even before the sun fully warmed the curtains, and the first thought in my mind wasn't the grocery list, or whether my hip would ache after walking. It was Thomas. I lingered in bed a moment, remembering his hand on mine, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, and how our kiss the night before hadn't just been sweet. It had felt like a door gently opening. Not forced, not rushed, just real. I found myself humming in the kitchen as I made my morning coffee. That hum surprised me. It had been years since I'd made noise just because I was content. By late morning, Thomas showed up with a small bouquet of wild flowers, the kind you find off the highway, not the store. They were unevenly tied together with a piece of twine, and somehow they were more beautiful than any roses or lilies could have ever been. "They made me think of you," he said simply. I smiled, touched them with my fingers. "A little wild, huh?" "A little wild," he agreed. "And still growing." We spent most of that day together, running errands like two people who'd done it for years. He came with me to the post office, helped me carry bags at the market, even waited while I tried on a light sweater at the shop downtown. And when we stopped at the diner for lunch, Thomas sat across from me in that red vinyl booth and watched me with the kind of attention I thought men stopped giving after 60. "You're staring," I teased. "I know," he said, unashamed. "I like seeing you this way." "What way is that?" "Open, happy, like you remembered how to shine." That stayed with me. After lunch we came back to my house. The day had turned overcast, and a cool breeze swept through the yard. Thomas suggested we sit in the backyard instead of the porch, something different. I brought out a blanket and 2 glasses of iced tea. He brought an old portable radio he kept in his garage. We sat under the tree near the fence line, the same one that used to shade Marcus when he'd sit with his newspaper in the summers. The radio played soft, crackly oldies, songs that belonged to someone else's youth, and still somehow felt like part of ours. Thomas took my hand again and I let my head rest on his shoulder. "This doesn't scare you?" I asked quietly. He was quiet a moment. "It did at first, but now I think it would scare me more not to feel this." I breathed in slow and deep as if I could pull that moment inside me and keep it. His shoulder, his voice, the weight of his hand over mine. It all made me feel anchored. And I realized this wasn't about being rescued. Thomas wasn't saving me from loneliness or sadness or age. He wasn't trying to make me young again. He was just meeting me where I was, seeing me as I was. That night we cooked again. Something about the routine of it, peeling potatoes side by side, laughing over spilled herbs, it built something deeper between us. Not just romance, intimacy, a shared rhythm. After dinner, he walked me to the hallway like a gentleman. We stood at the door to my bedroom in a soft hallway light, and he looked at me as if waiting for permission, not for something physical, but for closeness, and I gave it. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. We kissed slowly, quietly. There was no urgency, no heat pressed by time. It was patient. And in that kiss I felt all the things I thought I'd left behind in my youth. Desire, yes, but also tenderness, security, wonder. We lay together that night, not tangled or rushed, just near. He held me like I was something valuable, something he never thought he'd hold again. And I held him like I'd been waiting for him longer than I realized. In the stillness, as our breathing settled, and the house slipped into darkness, I felt something inside me click into place. A piece of myself I hadn't even known was missing. Not because Thomas completed me. No, I was whole on my own. But he saw me, and in seeing me reminded me I wasn't done living. In the morning, before the sun even rose, I whispered to him. I thought I was too old for this. For all of this. He kissed my temple, smiling against my skin. "You're not too old for anything." And I believed him. We took our time getting up, made breakfast together again. The world hadn't changed, but I had. Later that week, we walked hand in hand through the farmer's market. A few heads turned and I heard someone whisper, "Is that Hannah with Thomas?" And I smiled. Yes, it was. I had been many things in my life: a wife, a mother, a widow, a quiet woman with a good heart, and a lot of silence. But now I was something else, too. I was seen. I was wanted. I was awake. And somewhere between a dripping faucet and a bouquet of roadside flowers, something inside me had been repaired. Not by accident, but by grace, by courage, and by a man who knocked on my door with a wrench and found a way to fix something far more important than copper pipes. He helped me remember what it felt like to be touched, understood, and cherished even in the late chapters of life. And the best part, this story wasn't ending.